The United States has thousands of federal, state, county, and city laws, and some of them are surprisingly specific, outdated, or just plain bizarre. And here's the interesting part. A lot of the famous weird laws you see online aren't actually real. Some were repealed decades ago. Some were never laws at all. And some are real, but only in a very specific state or city. So today, we're looking at 15 unusual American laws and legal rules that can actually be traced to real statutes or regulations. And by the end, you'll probably be asking one question. Who looked at this problem and thought, we need a law for that? Let's begin. Number 15. Wisconsin has a legal standard for highly pleasing cheese. Let's start with Wisconsin. Everyone knows Wisconsin takes cheese seriously. But apparently, the state takes the quality of cheese seriously enough to put it into regulations. Wisconsin has official standards for grading different types of cheese. And for certain premium-grade cheeses, the regulations actually describe the desired flavor as highly pleasing. Think about that for a second. There are government regulations that help determine whether cheese meets a particular grade. And one of the characteristics being considered is how pleasing the cheese tastes. Of course, this doesn't mean a police officer can arrest you for making bad cheddar. These are food standards used for grading and quality. But imagine being a cheese inspector. You take a bite, you look at your clipboard, and then you have to decide, is this cheese highly pleasing? Maybe it's good. Maybe it's very good. But if it's only moderately pleasing, apparently, Wisconsin has standards. And honestly, if you're going to have weird laws, this might be the most delicious one. Number 14. New Jersey doesn't let you pump your own gas. If you've never been to New Jersey, this might genuinely surprise you. You pull into a gas station. You put the car in park. And then, you do absolutely nothing. Because an attendant pumps the gas for you. New Jersey has regulations that prohibit customers from dispensing gasoline themselves at retail service stations. Instead, trained attendants handle the fuel. So if you're visiting from another state and instinctively jump out of your car and grab the pump, someone may quickly tell you, "Sir, get back in the car." For people who grew up in New Jersey, this is completely normal. But for someone from a state where self-service gas stations are everywhere, it can feel incredibly strange. You might even sit there wondering, why is everyone looking at me like I'm doing something illegal? Because, well, you probably shouldn't be pumping it yourself. And there's actually a practical reason behind the rule. Fuel is dangerous. The regulations are designed around safety and proper operation of gasoline dispensing equipment. Still, there's something funny about the fact that in most of America, pumping your own gas is completely ordinary. While in New Jersey, someone else is legally expected to do it for you. Number 13. Pennsylvania has a law about fortune-telling. Now things get much stranger. Pennsylvania actually has a statute specifically addressing fortune-telling. The law deals with people who, for financial gain, claim to tell fortunes or predict future events. And it doesn't stop there. It also refers to people claiming they can use things such as cards, astrology, spells, charms, or potions to influence events. So imagine opening the Pennsylvania Criminal Code and finding a section that basically says, fortune-telling. It's almost like something from a medieval law book. But there's an important detail. The statute isn't simply saying that believing in astrology is illegal. It focuses on people making these kinds of claims for money or financial gain. The idea is to target deceptive or fraudulent practices. Still, the wording is fascinating, because somewhere inside an American state law book, you can find legal language discussing fortune-telling, spells, potions, love charms, and predicting the future. Not exactly what you'd expect to find in a modern criminal code. Number 12. California has an actual law about dead frogs. California has some of the most famous strange laws in America. And this one is hard to beat. The California Fish and Game Code contains rules concerning frog jumping contests. Yes, frog jumping contests. California has a long tradition of frog jumping competitions, particularly associated with Calaveras County. And the state has regulations dealing with frogs used in these contests. Here's where it gets bizarre. The law addresses what happens if one of those frogs dies. And the answer is essentially, don't eat it. Don't use it for another purpose. Destroy it as soon as possible. Think about how specific that is. Someone actually had to consider this scenario. A frog enters a jumping contest. The frog dies. What should legally happen to the frog? And California's legal system has an answer. It sounds ridiculous until you understand the history. Frog jumping competitions are a real cultural tradition. So this isn't necessarily an example of lawmakers being completely irrational. It's an example of something unusual becoming common enough that lawmakers eventually had to regulate it. Number 11. Nevada has a strange connection to camels. When most people think about Nevada, they probably imagine Las Vegas. Casinos, bright lights, luxury hotels, the desert. But Nevada's history also includes something you probably wouldn't expect. Camels. During the 19th century, the United States actually experimented with using camels in the American Southwest. The idea was that camels might be useful for transporting supplies across dry desert environments. And that strange experiment became part of America's transportation history. Nevada's legal history contains restrictions associated with riding animals, including the famous rule about riding camels on public highways. Today, the idea is hilarious. Imagine driving down a Nevada highway and suddenly seeing a person riding a camel. You'd probably think you were hallucinating. But historically, camels weren't completely unimaginable in the American Southwest. And this is a perfect example of how laws can preserve traces of a very different America, a time when lawmakers had to think about problems that sound completely ridiculous today. Like, what exactly do we do about camels on the highway? Number 9. Wisconsin doesn't just regulate cheese. It gets extremely specific. At this point, Wisconsin deserves its own documentary, because the state's cheese regulations can get surprisingly detailed. The rules distinguish between different grades and characteristics of cheese. They can address things like flavor, texture, body, odor, and other qualities. This means the government isn't simply saying, make good cheese. It's creating standards that explain what different levels of cheese quality are supposed to look and taste like. And that's actually pretty important. If a product is sold as a particular grade, consumers need some kind of consistent standard. But when you read the legal language without the context, it sounds hilarious. Imagine telling someone, your cheese failed the state regulations because its flavor wasn't sufficiently pleasing. That sentence sounds like it belongs in a comedy. But in Wisconsin, cheese is big business. So detailed standards actually make sense. And this is why some weird laws become fascinating once you understand the reason behind them. Number 8. Pennsylvania's law also talks about love potions. Remember Pennsylvania's fortune-telling law? It gets even stranger. The statute addresses people who, for financial gain, claim they can use spells, charms, or potions to influence events. That includes claims involving romantic relationships. In other words, a person couldn't simply make money by telling someone, give me $100 and I'll use this magical potion to make that person fall in love with you. The law was aimed at fraudulent commercial claims. And honestly, that makes sense. Throughout history, people have been willing to pay money for promises of supernatural solutions to their problems. Money problems, relationship problems, bad luck, lost objects, future predictions. So lawmakers created rules to deal with people profiting from those claims. But the result is one of the strangest pieces of legal language you can find. Because somewhere in Pennsylvania's law books, you can find references that sound like they belong in a fantasy novel. Spells, charms, potions, love. And somehow, it's part of American law. Number 7. New Jersey literally requires a gas station attendant. Here's another New Jersey rule that can surprise visitors. At a typical New Jersey retail gas station, you don't operate the fuel pump yourself. An attendant does it. The state's regulations say that fuel dispensing must be performed by an attendant who has received the required instructions. So if you move from a state where everyone pumps their own gas to New Jersey, you might instinctively grab the nozzle. Don't. Just sit back. Someone else will handle it. For Americans who grew up with this system, it's completely normal. For visitors, it can feel like you've accidentally traveled back to a time when every gas station was full service. And the funny thing is, in New Jersey, the weird thing is actually doing it yourself. Number 6. Wisconsin's cheese has a legal vocabulary. At this point, Wisconsin deserves its own documentary, because the state's cheese regulations get incredibly specific. The rules distinguish different grades and characteristics of cheese. For example, certain premium-grade cheeses need to meet specific flavor standards. Other cheese characteristics are described using technical terms relating to body, texture, odor, and flavor. This means the government isn't simply saying, "Make good cheese." It's effectively creating a vocabulary for what good cheese is supposed to mean. And this is actually a great example of how laws become weird over time. A regulation might be perfectly normal when it is created. Decades later, people read the wording without the original context and think, "Wait, this is actually in the law?" Yes, it is. Number 5. California regulates frog jumping contests. Now here's another California oddity. California's Fish and Game Code doesn't merely acknowledge frogs. It has an entire article dedicated to frog jumping contests. The law addresses the possession of frogs for these contests and what must happen if one dies. That means California's legal system has literally considered the possibility of a frog entering a competition, jumping, and dying. And the law has an answer. No eating it. No using it for something else. Destroy it as soon as possible. It's one of those laws that sounds completely absurd until you learn that frog jumping contests are an actual California tradition. And that's the fascinating thing about American laws. Sometimes the strangest regulations exist because something strange was once common enough to require regulation. Number 4. Some weird laws you see online aren't actually real. Now this one isn't a weird law. It's a weird fact about weird laws. Many of the craziest claims you've probably seen online are false, outdated, or exaggerated. For example, internet lists have claimed that Arizona has a law about donkeys sleeping in bathtubs. Another famous claim says Connecticut requires pickles to bounce. These stories are repeated so often that they start to feel like facts. But when researchers actually look for the statutes, many can't be found. This is why you have to be careful with videos like this. A law can be a current state statute, a local ordinance, an old law that has already been repealed, a regulation rather than a criminal law, or simply an internet myth. So when someone says, "It's illegal in America to do this," the next question should be, according to which law? Number 3. America still has laws that sound like they belong in another century. This is perhaps the strangest part of all. The United States has an enormous legal system. Federal laws, state laws, county rules, city ordinances, administrative regulations. And many of them were written decades ago. Some were created to solve very specific problems. Others were designed for circumstances that barely exist anymore. And repealing a law isn't always automatic. A legislature has to take action. That means a rule can survive simply because nobody has bothered to remove it. That's why you can find legal language today dealing with things that sound completely disconnected from modern life. The law doesn't always evolve as quickly as society does. And sometimes, that leaves behind some fascinating legal fossils. Number 2. The weirdest laws are often the ones that actually make sense. Here's the twist. Some of the strangest laws on our list aren't actually stupid. New Jersey's gas pumping rules are connected to fuel safety. California's frog rules are connected to animal handling. Wisconsin's cheese regulations are connected to food quality. Pennsylvania's fortune-telling statute is aimed at fraudulent commercial practices. When you understand the history, the laws stop looking completely ridiculous. The wording might be strange. The subject matter might be hilarious. But the original problem was often very real. And that's what makes these laws interesting. They're not just jokes. They're snapshots of American history. Number 1. The biggest weird law of all. There isn't one American law book. Here's the biggest surprise. When someone says, America has a law that says, you should immediately ask, where in America? Because the United States isn't governed by one giant list of rules. Each state has its own laws. Cities can have their own ordinances. Counties can have additional regulations. And federal law sits above them. So a rule can be completely legal in one state and prohibited in another. That's why New Jersey can require attendants to pump gasoline while someone in another state happily does it themselves. It's why Pennsylvania can have a specific statute addressing commercial fortune-telling. And it's why California can have an actual legal section dealing with dead frogs from jumping contests. America's legal system is enormous. And sometimes, when you dig deep enough, you find something absolutely bizarre. So, which one of these laws surprised you the most? The cheese that has to be highly pleasing? The fortune-telling statute? The dead frog rule? Or the fact that New Jersey doesn't let customers pump their own gas? And remember, not every weird law story you see online is true. Some are myths. Some were repealed. Some are local ordinances. And some are real laws that sound completely ridiculous without their historical context. That's what makes America's legal history so fascinating. Because sometimes the strangest stories aren't hiding in Hollywood. They're hiding in the law books. If you enjoyed this video, hit like, subscribe, and comment below. Which American law should we investigate next? See you in the next one.